First class isn't for people like you." The words struck harder than turbulence. Captain Sarah Mitchell didn't even glance twice as she blocked the aisle with her arm pointing toward the economy cabin like she was waving away a fly. Julian Hayes didn't flinch. He simply handed over his boarding stub. But it wasn't enough. Unverified, she snapped, "You'll need to step aside or be removed." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. One, a silver-haired executive, shoved his briefcase where Julian's bag had been. Another leaned in to whisper, "Must have snuck in." No one knew the man they were mocking wasn't just another traveler. He owned the entire aircraft. And in just 12 minutes, he would flip their assumptions and the entire flight hierarchy upside down. Because this wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. This was a deliberate test. And the results would shock the world. Before we dive deeper, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories of justice, power, and accountability. Now buckle up. Julian Hayes is about to remind everyone what real leadership looks like at 38,000 feet. Julian Hayes didn't argue. He simply stood still like a monument built not of stone, but of patience, hardened over years of being overlooked, underestimated, and erased. Captain Sarah Mitchell's voice cut across the cabin again. "Security will be called if you don't move, sir." She held his decoy boarding pass between two gloved fingers, the way someone might hold a dirty tissue. Her tone wasn't confused, it was certain. The kind of certainty reserved for people who've never had to question their own place in the world. A few passengers glanced up from their drinks and devices. Most looked away. Julian didn't. He glanced at the overhead compartment where his small leather bag had just been displaced by a silver briefcase. Its owner, Richard Holt, a man in his 50s with an elite badge clipped to his lapel, was already seated and smirking. "Let's not waste any more time," Richard said, adjusting his cufflinks. "We've got places to be." Julian said nothing. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt. The threads were ordinary. The watch was modest. Nothing about him screamed billionaire CEO. That was intentional. This was a test. An internal protocol exercise to observe how Zenith Aviation staff treated passengers who didn't conform to their image of wealth or influence. But it was no longer just a protocol. It was personal. Sarah turned toward her first officer. "I'm flagging him," she muttered loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Delaying our departure." Julian remained composed. Years of boardrooms, venture meetings, and silent betrayals had trained him well. From across the aisle, a man lifted his phone. Liam Chen, a well-known travel blogger. Young, observant. His phone tilted subtly, camera aimed perfectly. He recognized Julian instantly, but didn't say a word. Not yet. Julian gave him a barely perceptible nod. Liam began recording. Back in the cockpit, First Officer Thomas Blake reviewed the manifest. Sarah leaned over his shoulder. "Hayes Julian. Doesn't show on our verified passenger list. That's because he was a last-minute add-on Emma Walsh, the flight attendant offered carefully." Sarah frowned. "Then, where's his confirmation code?" Emma hesitated. "I didn't receive it." "Then he's not verified," Sarah snapped. Julian heard every word, and still he didn't speak. Because this wasn't the first time his worth had been questioned without reason. It wouldn't be the last. But it might be the last time someone did it in ignorance. He tapped his smart ring twice. A silent signal. Back at Zenith headquarters, in a high-rise tower of glass and data, his executive assistant, Annika Sharma, received the ping. Her fingers moved swiftly across a keyboard. Protocol 3 activated. This wasn't just about treatment anymore. It was about exposure. Across the terminal, hidden cameras embedded in Zenith's internal audit program began backing up every frame, every mic feed, every log entry on board the aircraft. Sarah returned to Julian, who hadn't moved. "You have two options," she said flatly. "Verify your credentials or remove yourself to economy." He met her eyes. "What policy allows you to demand financial proof from a seated passenger?" Her lips twitched. "Don't play games." Emma Walsh stepped forward, holding a tablet. Without a word, she pulled up the flight manifest and tapped Julian's name. The screen flashed red. "Unauthorized." She tapped again. "Recommend removal." Julian watched her finger hesitate before she hit. "Confirm." She hit it anyway. In Zenith, HQ, Anaka watched the log change in real time. Emma had just flagged her own CEO as a potential intruder on his own aircraft. A second later, Sarah leaned into the intercom. "Passengers' apologies for the delay. We're resolving a seating issue." The tone was calm, professional, sanitized. Julian remained silent. But inside, something shifted. From the rear of first class, a man whispered, "Must have been trying to upgrade." Richard Holt chuckled. "Try budget flights next time." Julian didn't respond. He simply leaned back in the seat his seat and opened his phone. The app glowed softly. Zenith Internal Compliance Live Feed. He tapped a single button. Begin archival review. Every camera angle, every crew mic, every decision log now streaming directly into the internal audit server. And then the twist. Across the cabin, Emma's tablet buzzed. She tapped the screen. Her eyes widened. Sarah," she said softly. "We've got a message from HQ." Sarah snatched the tablet. On the screen, one line blinked caution passenger flagged as owner. "Cease escalation. Internal protocol under review." Sarah paled. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What the hell?" But it was too late. Across the aisle, Liam Chen's post had just gone live. Zenith crew profiles, black passenger, no ID check, just removal. He's not just any passenger. He's Julian Hayes. He owns this plane. Within seconds, it began to spread. Julian didn't smile. He simply whispered to himself, "Let them watch what comes next." The cabin wasn't loud. It was worse, it was tense. Every eye was now flickering between Emma's tablet, Sarah's frown, and the man who hadn't moved from his seat. Julian Hayes sat calmly, hands resting on the armrest, as if the storm that swirled around him was just a passing cloud. But inside Zenith headquarters, it was anything but calm. Anaka Sharma was already 10 steps ahead. On her third monitor, a digital timeline was auto-generating a minute-by-minute event chain complete with audio logs, internal crew actions, and passenger interactions. The file had a label. Incident 2187. Potential profile discrimination. CEO engaged. Her fingers flew. She issued a Level 3 legal alert. Elena Ruiz Zenith's legal counsel received it on her secure line and activated Protocol 303, a full internal review with data preservation triggers. Every crew action, from the moment Julian stepped on board, was now legally documented and backed up to Zenith's private cloud. Back in the cabin, Liam Chen refreshed his social media feed. Over 58,000 views. His caption had hit like a bullet in Clear Air billionaire tech CEO profiled on his own plane. Staff threatened removal. Caught it all on camera. Comments were pouring in. Name the airline. Tag the FAA. Expose them. Sarah Mitchell's voice dropped into a whisper. "We need to contain this." But she was already too late. Julian looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time since she tried to eject him. "You flagged me," he said evenly. "Without ID verification. Without protocol." Sarah tried to recover. "Sir, we didn't have your name on record." Julian turned toward Emma. "You touched the tablet last. Did you confirm anything before marking me?" Unauthorized. Emma blinked. I didn't know. You didn't check. No, she whispered. That's when the first tremor hit. The cabin display screens, those usually used for flight data and route maps, suddenly updated. One screen flashed a live headline. Breaking Tech CEO denied seat on owned jet. Possible profiling incident. The source, Bloomberg Business. Gasps rippled down the aisle. Passengers leaned into screens. Phones lit up. Murmurs grew. Julian didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Power doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself. Sarah stepped back. We didn't realize. You didn't care to realize, Julian cut in. You had every tool, every resource, and every chance. You chose bias, not policy. Thomas Blake. The first officer stepped forward, trying to restore order. Sir, for the sake of this flight, let's all return to our assigned. I am in my assigned seat, Julian said. Then let's verify your identity. Thomas said a little too loud. We need to see payment confirmation. Or. You want financial proof? Julian asked, standing slowly. Fine. He pulled out his phone. Annika, confirm ownership of tail number Zen 604. The call was on speaker. Annika's voice came through clear and surgical. Zen 604 is registered under Zenith Technologies Holdings. Sole owner, Dr. Julian Isaiah Hayes. Dead silence. Julian turned the phone toward the crew. Still unclear, Sarah's face tightened. Liam typed fast. His next post went viral in under 2 minutes. Julian Hayes confirms aircraft ownership via live company audit. Crew exposed mid-flight. Zenith fail from seat 2B. A quiet voice spoke. Malik Jordan, a black entrepreneur in his 30s, nodded toward Julian. Let it roll. You're not just proving a point anymore. You're showing everyone how deep this thing goes. Julian nodded once, and then the twist. Emma's tablet vibrated again. She glanced down. A pop-up warning appeared. Unauthorized manifest modification detected employee credentials temporarily locked contact compliance department immediately. Her hands trembled. What is this? She whispered. Julian didn't answer. He didn't need to, because at that moment, every display screen in the cabin flickered again. Now playing a message from Zenith Technologies Legal Division. A pre-recorded corporate advisory rolled across the screen in quiet, authoritative text. This aircraft is undergoing a verified internal audit. Any interference with manifest integrity or data logging will be treated as a violation of corporate conduct. All crew are advised to cease escalation and await further review. Passengers froze. Richard Holt scoffed. Now you're playing videos. What is this, a PR stunt? He stood up, waving his elite badge. This is absurd. I demand priority clearance. Julian turned toward him for the first time. You waved a fake badge. Expired last year. My team's already logged it. Richard paled. From HQ, Anaka's voice buzzed into Julian's ear. Badge confirmed invalid. Filed under ethics violation. The room shifted again. Passengers whispered. Phones captured every second. Julian remained still, calm as a storm's eye. Then he spoke. To everyone watching, I didn't come to embarrass anyone. I came to test a system. He looked straight at Sarah. And you just failed it in front of the world. The silence after Julian's words was suffocating. No one moved. Not Sarah Mitchell. Not Thomas Blake. Not even Richard Holt, who stood frozen with his expired elite badge still dangling from his hand like an empty threat. The only thing moving was the scroll of headlines across the forward display. Zenith CEO profiled mid-flight owns the aircraft passengers demand. Accountability after racial incident at 38,000 tons FT breaking FAA monitoring incident on Zenith charter. Zen 604. The cabin had become a courtroom in the sky. Liam Chen kept filming now, with a second phone he had quietly slipped from his bag, one with a wide-angle lens. He was live-streaming the entire moment to his 600,000 followers. Justice, he whispered to himself, doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just shows up with receipts. In seat 3A, an elderly woman murmured to her husband, "They're going to lose their jobs, aren't they?" He nodded solemnly. Back in Zenith, HQLNA Ruiz was reviewing the raw data from the flight's audit stream. She frowned. Emma Walsh manually flagged Julian as unauthorized within 9 seconds of opening the manifest, she said aloud. Didn't even scan his ID. That's targeted behavior, Annika replied. Zero verification protocol followed. Just assumption and escalation. Elena's voice was cold steel. Then she doesn't belong in this company. She toggled a legal response protocol. Crew under disciplinary review. Effective immediately. Back on the jet, Sarah finally broke the silence. "I didn't know who you were," she said. Julian looked at her eyes, unreadable. "But you knew I didn't look like I belonged." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I was following procedure." "No, you were following prejudice." Julian cut in calm, but sharp. "You never asked who I was. You decided what I wasn't." A soft murmur passed through the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, no longer indifferent observers, but reluctant jurors. Thomas Blake tried to redirect. "Sir, this situation is spiraling. If we could just deboard and review." "You want me to leave my own plane?" Julian asked, arching a brow. "That's not yes or no, First Officer." Thomas swallowed hard. "It's a misunderstanding." Julian turned back to his seat, then looked at Emma. "And what exactly was misunderstood when you logged me as a threat?" Emma's lips trembled. I didn't realize." "You realized enough to label me without confirmation," Julian replied. "You just didn't expect anyone to notice." Liam's livestream ticked past 1.2 million views. The cabin display updated again. Zenith Technologies confirms internal audit underway. CEO Julian Hayes engaged in onboard compliance review. Crew faces immediate termination, pending review. Richard muttered, "This is ridiculous. He's making a spectacle out of nothing." A voice from row 4 snapped back. "No, you made it a spectacle when you mocked him." Julian remained seated, still calm, still quiet, still recording everything. But then came the turning point. From the cockpit, a new voice came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell. Due to a procedural discrepancy, we are delaying takeoff. We ask for your patience." It was her attempt at regaining control, reframing the narrative. But Julian wasn't about to let her. He stood again. "Let me clarify for everyone on board," he said now, facing the entire first-class cabin. "This is not a delay due to weather or technical failure. This is a delay due to systemic failure, and we are documenting every moment of it." He turned toward Liam. "Are we live?" 2.1 million watching, Liam replied. Julian nodded. "Good." Then, with deliberate calm, he walked to the forward bulkhead, opened the comms panel, and tapped in his executive override credentials. A soft beep confirmed the input. Sarah gasped. "You don't have authorization to—" "I have authorization over every aircraft in this fleet," Julian said. And then he pressed the button. "This is Dr. Julian Hayes, CEO of Zenith Technologies. As of now, this aircraft is grounded under internal compliance protocol. All operations are suspended until full review is complete. Any attempt to override this order will be treated as a breach of corporate policy and FAA standards." The cabin erupted, not with panic, with relief. A quiet clapping began in the rear. It grew, passengers applauding not for revenge, but for the sheer audacity of truth. Emma stepped back, eyes wide. Thomas sat down heavily in the cockpit chair, defeated. Sarah stood still, as if her spine was holding her together. And Richard. He just sat in silence, face flushed with disbelief. Julian returned to his seat. He tapped his ring once more. A final signal. Control assumed. Protocol escalation confirmed. Then he looked out the window. They weren't in the air. But Justice had already taken flight. Julian Hayes sat still as the subtle click of cabin doors locking echoed through the aircraft. The engines had not yet started, but the system had already begun turning. This wasn't turbulence. This was structural upheaval. Inside Zenith, HQ Elena Ruiz issued a live compliance override across all Zenith aviation flights. The system automatically flagged crew logs from the past 72 hours, searching for patterns. Emma Walsh's profile was the first to ping. Elena read the internal behavior analytics summary aloud. 8 manifest modifications without supervisor clearance. 4 passengers flagged as irregular presence, 3 of whom were black or brown men in business class. 2 records deleted and rewritten post-departure. She leaned back in her chair. This isn't incompetence. It's coordinated. Annika nodded. I'll widen the search. Start building the case file. Back in the cabin of Zen 604, the tension was now electric. Not loud, not chaotic, but electric. Liam Chen's livestream viewership had now crossed 3 million. And now passengers weren't just watching, they were speaking. A woman in 3F stood. I'm an HR executive for East Air. I recognize profiling when I see it, she said calmly. And I just watched it play out live in front of all of us. Her voice wasn't raised, but it was loud in its clarity. Another passenger, an Indian-American man in seat 4C, added, He asked for nothing. He complied. And still, you labeled him. That tells me your default protocol is discrimination. Sarah's jaw tensed. I was trying to protect our cabin from unauthorized entry. You were trying to protect a power structure, Julian said from his seat, not the passengers. Thomas tried again to salvage the situation. We can handle this through internal review after landing. Julian shook his head slowly. There won't be a we by landing. He tapped his ring again. This time, the signal triggered internal diagnostics. All Zenith aircraft now began uploading audit data. Flight logs, security interactions, cabin voice recordings, every line, every entry. Emma's tablet vibrated, then froze. A system lockout had been triggered. Her access was suspended. Why is it locked? She whispered. Julian turned to her. Because until 5 minutes ago, you were altering records about your CEO. And you did it with confidence because no one ever told you someone was watching. Another screen in the cabin updated. This time, it wasn't Bloomberg. It was Reuters. Zenith CEO grounds aircraft. Mid-flight after racial profiling allegations. Internal review underway. And just beneath it, FAA responds monitoring event. Statement pending. Richard Holt groaned. This is out of control. But then the twist. From the intercom above, Elena's voice emerged this time, piped directly into the cabin. This is Elena Ruiz, Chief Legal Counsel of Zenith Technologies. We are currently reviewing all logs and crew data associated with Flight Zen 604. Preliminary findings confirm unauthorized manifest manipulation denial of service to a verified passenger and protocol violations. Immediate crew suspension is pending. Sarah turned to Emma. What the hell did you log? I followed what you told me. Emma whispered, panic rising in her throat. Julian stood again. He addressed the passengers directly now. This was never about a seat, he began. It was about what that seat represents. Who gets assumed worthy of it? Who gets asked to prove they belong? I created Zenith to break those assumptions, not reinforce them. He pointed gently at the forward screen. That's why this isn't just about this flight. It's about the culture behind it. Malik Jordan, the Black Tech founder in 2B, added, and it's about what happens when we let unchecked bias fly at 38,000 feet. A soft round of applause followed. Sarah snapped. "This is still my cabin," she hissed. "I'm the captain here." "Not anymore," Julian replied evenly. "You surrendered command the moment you tried to eject your employer without cause." Emma stammered. "We didn't know. You didn't care." Julian interrupted. And then the knockout blow. Liam Chen posted a new video clip, timestamped just 15 minutes earlier. Emma Walsh, no ID scan, no verification, only one tap, unauthorized. He captioned it, "One tap was all it took." They didn't ask. They assumed. And now they're being held accountable. Zenith Truth, reclaim the sky. Within moments, it was trending. Back in HQ, Anaka looked at Elena. "Elena, we just got a media inquiry from the New York Times." Elena nodded. "Time to go public." She pressed send on Zenith's official statement. "We stand by our commitment to equity, integrity, and accountability. No title protects someone from discipline. And no uniform justifies discrimination." Back on the aircraft, Julian remained standing calm in a sea of upheaval. He adjusted his cuff once more, then looked straight at Sarah. "You've spent years assuming people like me didn't belong in your airspace. But here's the truth. You've been flying in my sky this entire time." And with that, he returned to his seat power, intact, justice in motion. The mood in the cabin had changed. What began as disbelief had now shifted into revelation. Whispers had become conversations. Passengers were no longer bystanders, they were witnesses. Julian Hayes knew the real storm was only just beginning. At Zenith, HQ Elena Ruiz leaned over her desk, her voice steady. "I want a historical audit on Captain Sarah Mitchell, First Officer Thomas Blake, and Emma Walsh. Look for sealed complaints, irregular crew assessments, anything manually closed." Within seconds, the compliance AI began processing over 900 pages of archived incident records. At line 74, it pinged. Flight 2713, March 2023. Complaint filed, passenger profiling. Outcome closed, insufficient evidence. Officer Mitchell co-signed. Blake line 121, pinged again, like 1955, October 2024. Complaint filed, aggressive removal of black passenger despite valid ticket. Outcome complaint withdrawn under pressure. Note, passenger chose not to pursue. Logged by E. Walsh. Elena's breath slowed. They weren't isolated cases. They were patterns. Back on board, Zen 604, Julian's earpiece buzzed. Julian Anaka said quietly, "We've uncovered a string of complaints linked directly to this crew, some sealed manually by Thomas Blake, others erased and rewritten by Emma. Elena is confirming it now." Julian didn't blink. He had suspected it. But seeing the pattern confirmed, it was a gut punch, even for him. From row 3, the Eastair HR executive stood again. "If these are patterns, you have legal grounds for crew termination under industry conduct codes." Julian nodded. "We're beyond legal now," he replied. "We're at moral necessity." Sarah Mitchell, standing near the cockpit door, gripped the edge of a seat back. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You think you're the first person who's ever been challenged at boarding." Julian turned toward her slowly. "No," he said, calm and deliberate. "I'm just the first one who owns the plane you tried to kick me off." Gasps rippled again. Even Thomas Blake winced. Sarah sneered. "We deal with security threats all the time. You triggered a protocol, I triggered nothing. You made assumptions. That's not protocol. That's prejudice with a badge." She stepped forward, face flushing. "This is all politics and theatrics. You want to go viral, fine. But this isn't how airlines are run. Julian didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke with precision. This isn't how my airline is run. And your history proves exactly why we had to change it. Then came the twist. Elena's voice chimed into the intercom again, this time with finality. This is Elena Ruiz, legal counsel for Zenith Technologies. We've completed a compliance audit on Captain Sarah Mitchell, First Officer Thomas Blake, and Flight Attendant Emma Walsh. Findings confirm the following: sealed racial profiling complaints, unauthorized removal of passengers without evidence, pattern of manifest manipulation, use of internal codes to target passengers by appearance. A collective gasp filled the cabin. Passengers who had been silent now looked at the crew with visible disgust. Malik Jordan muttered, "They've been doing this for years." Sarah tried to speak, but Elena continued. Under FAA Policy 49, CFR Paragraph 15.7, and Zenith's Internal Code of Conduct, all three are now suspended pending termination, effective immediately. Emma's tablet screen turned black. Access revoked. Thomas dropped his headset onto the cockpit floor. Sarah, she didn't move. Julian stood again, walking toward her one last time. "You could have changed," he said. "You had chances. Dozens. But you chose to protect power, not people." Sarah shook her head. "You don't understand what this job's like." Julian leaned in. "No, you don't understand what this seat means. Because if you did, you'd never have tried to take it from someone who earned it." From behind them, Liam Chen's live stream continued to roll. The comment section exploded. "This is justice. Finally. A crew exposed. He's not just flying, he's rewriting the rules." And then the unexpected climax. From the back of the plane, a voice called out. It was a man in his late 60s, quiet, reserved, wearing a worn pilot's jacket. "I used to fly with Sarah, back when we were at Atlantic Wings. I filed a complaint once, 2009, about her refusing to board a black engineer. It got buried." The cabin fell silent. He continued, "I was told to shut up, told it would ruin her record, but I knew she'd do it again." Julian turned toward him. "Sir, may I ask your name?" "Captain Ron Delaney," the man replied. "Retired, but I never forgot." Julian nodded once. "You've just reopened the record." And with that, the past came rushing into the present with nowhere left to hide. The quiet inside Zen 604 had become something deeper reverence. What began as a humiliation was now becoming a historic pivot. Julian Hayes didn't want revenge. He wanted systemic change. And change required escalation. He walked to the cockpit doorway and tapped twice on the embedded crew command panel. The biometric reader glowed blue as it confirmed his identity. "Welcome, Dr. Hayes. Executive access verified." Behind him, passengers stared in awe. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't speculating. He owned the very bones of this aircraft. From his wrist, Julian activated Protocol 5, an emergency override designed not for mechanical failure, but ethical failure. Back in Zenith, HQ alarms went live. Screens flashed a rare code. Executive Protocol 5, Compliance Crisis Mode. Instant company-wide freeze on log tampering legal lock on all flight data streams, auto-notification to FAA and EEOC. Elena Ruiz stood up from her desk. "He's serious," she muttered. Annika, reading the same terminal, nodded. "He's about to tear the whole structure down by policy." Back on the jet, Sarah Mitchell leaned against the galley counter, her face blank. Emma Walsh sat in silence, her tablet dark. Thomas Blake was on his second bottle of water, hands shaking. Julian returned to his seat, but he didn't relax. He looked down the aisle. "We're not done," he said loud enough for the cabin to hear. "The story started with a refusal. It will end with reform." Liam Chen, still recording, posted a new update. Julian Hayes just activated Zenith's escalation protocol. First time ever. Corporate system locked. FAA looped in. This isn't a story, it's a reckoning. Over 4.7 million viewers watched the moment unfold in real time. Comments flooded in. This is bigger than one flight. System-wide audit incoming. Airlines take notes. Just then, Julian's earpiece crackled. Julian Elena said, FAA's Civil Rights Division just requested a direct transcript of your flight logs. We're sending it. Send everything, Julian replied. No edits. No summaries. Yes, sir. From seat 2B, Malik Jordan leaned over. You just involved the federal government. Julian nodded. That was the point. Sarah, clearly listening, barked. You're going to destroy this company's public image. No, Julian said calmly. You did that. I'm just making sure people see it. Then came the twist. A Zenith ground control officer appeared at the cabin entrance. Lucas Baird, tall in his late 30s, wearing a dark Navy operations blazer with a gold Zenith pin. He moved with authority, but not aggression. He addressed Julian directly. Sir, Corporate Command has elevated this to Tier 1. I'm here to remove the suspended personnel and lock their terminals. Sarah stepped forward. You can't, I can, Lucas said. You've been flagged under executive audit. Please surrender your access credentials. One by one, Sarah Thomas and Emma were asked to place their crew badges into a clear pouch and step back from their posts. Julian watched as their control privileges were physically revoked, not just by policy, but by presence. Passengers didn't cheer. They observed, because they knew they were watching something rare. Consequences. Lucas turned to Julian. Do you want me to escort them off the plane? Julian shook his head. No. Let them walk. Let them feel every step of what they created. Lucas nodded and stepped aside. Julian looked directly at Sarah. You'll walk past every passenger you tried to erase, and they'll remember you not as a pilot, but as a warning. Sarah didn't speak. She just clenched her jaw and marched down the aisle. Thomas followed, head bowed. Emma came last, eyes darting between passengers, searching for sympathy she had long forfeited. As they exited, the door sealed shut behind them. And just then, the forward cabin screen changed again. A breaking news segment rolled. Zenith Technologies fires. Entire flight crew over discrimination incident. CEO Julian Hayes enacts live escalation protocol. FAA EEOC begin immediate joint investigation. Julian exhaled, but not in relief. In preparation. Malik whispered, They're going to come after you for this. I know, Julian replied. And I'm ready. But before he could return to his seat, one final shock dropped. Annika's voice came through, strained and urgent. Julian, we just traced internal crew chat logs. There's more. More. There was a covert phrase used by crew for over 2 years. A code. Julian stood still. What code? She hesitated. Visual mismatch. He blinked. Say it again. They used the term visual mismatch to flag passengers who didn't fit the image of first-class clientele, mostly black and brown professionals. We found dozens of instances. Julian closed his eyes for a beat. The audience watching the stream heard him whisper. They built a system to identify people like me as mistakes. Then he looked straight into the camera and said, And now we're going to rebuild it without them. Julian Hayes stood silent for a beat. Visual mismatch. 2 words, but they echoed like thunder. Not just a label, a weapon used silently in backrooms crew chats and whispered side remarks. A weapon designed to erase people like him without ever raising a voice. He turned toward the screen where the Bloomberg ticker still flashed. Now it showed something new, visual mismatch trending 1 globally. Expose Zenith employees used code to profile passengers, senators. Call for aviation bias hearings. Julian walked slowly back to the front of the cabin. His steps weren't hurried, but deliberate, like someone carrying the weight of an entire generation's humiliation on his back. He turned to face the passengers. "You've heard the phrase now," he said. "And if this company is going to be what I founded it to be, then we have to start by naming the infection before we treat it." He tapped his ring once. "Annika, begin the purge." Back at Zenith HQ, Annika initiated a system-wide scrub. All internal crew chats, audit histories, flagged phrases, crew evaluation notes, everything referencing visual mismatch was extracted, categorized, and forwarded to the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Division and the EEOC. Julian didn't stop there. "Elena," he called. "What's the legal window for initiating full anti-bias compliance reform across all Zenith departments? 60 days for a voluntary overhaul. But if you declare an emergency reform protocol, we can enforce it in 7. He looked into the camera. 7 it is. Liam Chen, still filming, whispered into his mic. Julian Hayes just declared war on institutional bias. Not tomorrow. Not later. Right now. A flurry of alerts hit passenger phones. Zenith's official app, updated Zenith Equity Reform, begins now. New AI bias detection systems on board. Independent third-party ethics monitors assigned to all flagship flights. Open reporting lines for passengers and crew. Full crew recertification within 30 days. In 2B, Malik Jordan turned toward Julian. "You're rewriting how aviation operates." "No," Julian said softly. "I'm restoring what should have existed all along: dignity at 38,000 feet." At that moment, a voice came from the rear. "Excuse me," said an older black woman in seat 4F. She stood adjusting her scarf. Her voice was calm but powerful. "I've been flying for 32 years, been given plastic cutlery in first class, asked if I was in the wrong seat, watched people walk past me like I was the help." She took a step forward. "But today, for the first time, I feel like I belong. Not because of where I sit, but because someone in power saw me." She walked over to Julian and offered her hand. "Thank you." Julian took it, then whispered, "No. Thank you for surviving long enough for us to do this right." The entire cabin applauded, not like a crowd, but like a community. At Zenith, HQ Elena's screen buzzed again. "Julian," she said into his earpiece, "we just received a message from the FAA's Equity Division. They want to pilot Zenith's AI bias detection software across 3 major U.S. airlines." He smiled faintly. "Tell them we'll open source it. No charge." Annika raised her brow. "Julian, that's billions in IP value." "We've already paid the price," he said. "Now we balance the scale." And then came the surprise climax. A screen lit up with a live feed from another Zenith flight Zen 411. A passenger was being denied an upgrade. A black father in his 60s wearing a Tuskegee Airmen pin. Calm, respectful. The flight attendant stood over him, shaking her head. "Sir, this isn't your assigned class." But this time, the AI monitor interrupted. A robotic but clear voice echoed over that flight's cabin intercom. "Warning: potential bias flagged. Crew action contradicts boarding data. Please reassess passenger classification per standard compliance." The attendant froze. Passengers turned. Julian watched the live feed and nodded. The AI was working in real time. Not 6 months from now. Not after a lawsuit. Now. He turned to the Zen 604 passengers. This is what change looks like. Phones rose again. Photos were taken. Messages shared. Liam posted Julian Hayes didn't just fire the crew. He flipped the system. Bias gets flagged live now. Not buried. Not silenced. Welcome to the new sky. Back in his seat, Julian finally relaxed for the first time. The sky outside was still gray clouds, heavy with turbulence. But inside the cabin, clarity had landed. By the time Zenith Flight Zen 604's runway wheels had not even turned, the world had already moved. It was past midnight in New York, but morning in Europe, where headlines were exploding. CEO Julian Hayes grounds Jetfire's entire crew on the spot. Visual mismatch sparks global call for equity in air travel FAA and EEOC launch. Simultaneous inquiries into airline profiling practices. God sat quietly in seat 2A, watching it all unfold on the cabin screen. He hadn't moved much, but the world around him had shifted on its axis. At Zenith headquarters, Elena Ruiz's inbox was flooded with legal inquiries, subpoenas, and congratulations from senators, civil rights watchdogs, and even the NOAACP. A message came from the White House Civil Rights Committee requesting a private briefing. Julian, she said into the comms, they're calling this a defining moment for aviation ethics. Let's hope it becomes one, Julian replied. But we don't celebrate early. Not while people are still flying afraid. Back inside the aircraft, Liam Chen uploaded his 9th post since the incident began. Julian Hayes didn't react. He responded. This isn't just damage control, it's course correction, a new altitude of leadership. He included a split-screen image on the left, Julian seated silently while being denied his place. On the right, Julian commanding the cabin as CEO. Over 7.5 million impressions, 2.3 million likes, 300,000 shares, trending globally. Passengers on board were no longer just travelers. They were now witnesses in history. Malik Jordan opened his laptop and began writing a think piece titled Flying While Black. The luxury that was never guaranteed. The older woman in 4F, who had shaken Julian's hand earlier, was now responding to interview requests from 3 major news outlets. Julian remained stoic, because he knew the next move mattered most. He tapped his ring. Elena, he said, release the footage. A long pause. You're sure she asked? That video was meant for internal review only. Julian's voice was calm. And that was before we found the term visual mismatch. The public deserves to see not just what happened, but how it was hidden. Understood, Elena replied. 10 minutes later, Zenith Technologies uploaded a 6-minute video to every social platform under its name, titled simply, The Tape They Didn't Want You to See It Opened with Security Footage from Zen 604 Boarding. Julian calmly entering the jet, handing his boarding pass to Sarah Mitchell, her dismissive hand gesture, her turning to Thomas Blake with a knowing smirk, followed by Emma Walsh tapping unauthorized into her tablet without ever scanning his ID. The footage was time-stamped, unedited, undeniable. Then came audio, a crew intercom log from earlier that morning. Thomas. There's a guy in 2A. He doesn't look priority. Emma visual mismatch. Want me to flag Sarah? Yeah. I don't want that energy in first today. Boom. The public didn't just hear it. They felt it. Within 5 minutes, the video crossed 12 million views. People commented, how many times has this happened to someone without a title? She said, that energy. That's the racism code. Julian didn't call security. He became security. News stations cut their programming. Late-night anchors aired live coverage. Talk show hosts lined up their scripts to include visual mismatch. Even commercial brands tweeted support for Julian, some authentic, some opportunistic. But it didn't matter. The pressure was now on. Then came the high-impact climax. A message appeared on the Zenith headquarters screen from a major commercial airline, Stellar Fly. Dear Dr. Hayes, we've seen what you've done. We'd like your consultation on launching an equity audit across our domestic and international teams. Full funding your terms. Elena looked at Annika. He's changing the industry, she whispered. But Julian, he barely reacted. Tell them we'll help, he said, but only if they start by acknowledging the truth on record first. Back inside the aircraft, a young girl from economy walked into first class, maybe 9 years old. She had been watching everything from her seat. She stepped toward Julian, holding a small sketch pad. On it, she had drawn a plane with a man in a seat marked CEO. Beneath it, she had written, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Julian's eyes softened for the first time in hours. He took the drawing, knelt beside her, and whispered, "Don't be like me. Be better. Build something even higher." Phones caught the moment. Liam uploaded the photo, captioned the new first-class integrity, and with that, the story of the day transformed from exposure into legacy. The cabin felt different now, not just because the crew had been removed or the skies outside were darkening into dusk. It was something less visible, but more profound. A shift. For the first time, the air aboard Zen 604 was not filled with hierarchy protocol or assumption. It was filled with possibility. Julian Hayes sat quietly in 2A, reviewing a flood of notifications on his smartwatch. FAA liaisons were requesting virtual meetings. Universities had reached out asking to feature the Zenith case study. Even a coalition of former pilots had offered to participate in diversity training pro bono. He looked out the window. The clouds didn't seem as heavy now. In seat 2B, Malik Jordan tapped away at his laptop building a proposal to integrate Zenith's equity protocol across other luxury charter brands. Liam Chen paced discreetly near the rear galley, coordinating a new video essay with his editor back in LA. His voice was low but intense. This wasn't just a live stream anymore. It was becoming a documentary. Even the young girl who had handed Julian the sketch was back in economy, sitting taller now, showing her drawing to the woman next to her like it was a passport into her future. But not everyone had moved on. In seat 5D, a figure had sat silent through everything. He hadn't clapped, hadn't filmed, hadn't spoken. A tall man, mid-50s, dark suit, well-worn briefcase on his lap. He had boarded anonymously, just another executive in the sea of privilege that Zenith often ferried across continents. But now, as the cabin settled, and Julian prepared to initiate the next phase, the man stood. He stepped into the aisle, turned toward Julian, and cleared his throat. "I need to speak," he said. The cabin turned. Julian looked up, then gave a quiet nod. The man introduced himself. Walter Greaves, former head of compliance at Aero One Airlines, retired 3 years ago after a forced buyout. There was recognition in the air. Aero One had faced a discrimination scandal in 2022, quietly settled and sealed. No names were ever made public. Until now. Walter continued, "I've watched everything you've done today. And while I applaud it, I also need to admit something." He paused. "I was the one who first documented the phrase visual mismatch in 2018. A gasp rippled down the rows. Julian leaned forward slightly. "You what?" Walter's eyes didn't flinch. "I heard it from a senior flight attendant. I flagged it internally, drafted a report. But instead of investigating, they removed my oversight role and told me I was too sensitive to optics." He took out his phone. "I never deleted the memo." He turned the screen toward Julian. An original compliance PDF, time-stamped written in formal internal code, subject observed usage of VM, or visual mismatch in crew language, to flag black and brown passengers in premium cabins. Recommendation: immediate investigation and retraining of personnel. Status reassigned, marked low priority. No follow-up initiated. The file had never seen daylight, until now. Liam moved quickly, requesting to take a photo. Walter nodded. "It was easier to retire," Walter said. "I thought maybe the next generation would fix it, but they inherited it instead." Julian reached out and took the phone gently. He studied the language, then whispered, "You wrote this 5 years before today." Walter nodded, and no one listened. Julian looked around the cabin. "Well, they're listening now." Liam uploaded the memo with a caption that read, "Buried, ignored, but not gone." The original warning about visual mismatch finally surfaces. Whistleblown. The post hit 1 million views in 20 minutes. Walter sat down again. But now his role had changed, from silence to signal, from bystander to witness. Julian turned to Elena on the comms. "Get that file to the FAA director's inbox. No filter, no PR wrap." Elena's voice responded stronger now. "Already done." "And Julian, CNN wants a live interview in 1 hour." He didn't smile, but he nodded. This wasn't about being seen on TV. It was about ensuring the right people couldn't look away anymore. Then another alert. A private message from a young flight attendant at another airline. It read, "We've used that code too. Different words, same meaning. I want to speak out. I just need to know I'll be protected." Julian looked at it, then pressed reply. "You will be, and you won't be alone." For the first time since the boarding gate incident, his posture relaxed. Not because the war was over, but because it had finally reached the turning point. The cabin of Zen 604 was no longer a vessel. It had become a courtroom, a classroom, and now a broadcast tower. Julian Hayes sat calmly at his seat, his tablet connected directly to Zenith Technologies' global streaming network. No cameras, no makeup, no prep. Just truth. His finger hovered over the icon labeled Classified Brief Legacy Data Streams. Elena's voice came through his earpiece. "You're about to make a lot of enemies." "I'm not here to make friends," Julian replied. "I'm here to make it stop." Annika added, "Once you hit publish, every crew compliance file in our archives, flagged, ignored, sealed, will become public record." "Exactly," Julian said. Then he tapped. The screen blinked once, then again, and then it launched Zenith Transparency Release. All disciplinary flight reports, 2016-2025, all sealed complaints. Altered logs, manipulated crew ratings now available at zenithjustice.org. Passengers gasped as their phones lit up in sync. A live counter began ticking. 12,458 documents uploaded, 198, 722 unique IP views, 17,003 downloads in 60 seconds. The screen at the front of the cabin mirrored the feed. Redacted names, dates, internal notes with phrases like, "handled quietly," "passenger refunded privately," "flag removed before quarterly audit," "not ideal optics, advise against escalation." Liam Chen stood frozen. "Julian, this is an entire decade of buried truth." Julian looked straight at the forward camera. Not for show, but for documentation. To every passenger who was ever removed, downgraded, profiled, or shamed while flying any carrier, these records were not lost. They were hidden by systems designed to protect reputations over people. Then he added, "And starting today, you get them back." The feed exploded. The FAA's legal department issued a live statement just 5 minutes later. "We were unaware of the scale of this record suppression. We commend Zenith's leadership for choosing transparency. A federal task force is now forming. Even CNN, NBC, and the BBC ran Julian's live feed uncut. But it was what came next that stunned even Elena. A flood of crew members from other airlines began posting anonymously. I worked for Astrojet. We used a code LNC, Low Net Contribution, for passengers we didn't like the look of. It meant kick them to standby. On Blue Glide, we were told to check the bags harder for people who looked disruptive in first, meaning black. I watched a woman get removed for asking for a blanket in business class. She was Latina. They flagged her as temperamental. No incident report filed. Julian read each one, slowly, carefully. He turned to Malik in 2B. I knew we weren't the only ones, but I didn't expect the floodgates to open this fast. Then the twist. Elena's voice came sharp and low. Julian, we've just been hit with a cease and desist notice. From whom? There was silence. Then Omni-Air. Julian's eyes narrowed. Omni-Air, the largest aviation holding group in the Western Hemisphere, parent company to over 12 major commercial brands. He exhaled once. They're afraid this data leads back to them. It does, Annika said. I just found 2 sealed complaints filed by Zenith whistleblowers against Omni-Air code-share pilots. One incident involved physical restraint over a mistaken boarding group. Julian didn't raise his voice, but every word became steel. Don't redact it. Don't hold it. Don't delay it. Release it. Within seconds, 2 more files hit the zenithjustice.org page. One included a handwritten note from a young black flight attendant who had tried to report a senior captain in 2020. It ended with the words, "They made me feel invisible. I'm done being invisible." The internet ignited. Invisible began trending alongside visual mismatch. Then Liam posted a simple statement. Hayes just flipped the aircraft around, not literally, but morally. The altitude of power just dropped to where real people live. Meanwhile, within Omni-Air, HQ damage control had already begun. Emails leaked. Slack messages from executives advising department heads to scrub files, delay audits, and prepare optics in case FAA demands compliance. Julian received the leaks in real time. Elena confirmed them. They're burning evidence. He stood up in the center of the cabin and said just 6 words. They're running because we stood still. And then the final blow of the part. The forward cabin screen flickered once, then displayed a headline from Reuters' congressional hearing announced discrimination in commercial aviation. Julian Hayes subpoenaed to testify. Passengers clapped quietly. Julian didn't bow. He didn't speak. He just stared forward, ready for the next altitude. By the time Zen 604 reached cruising altitude, Julian Hayes had left the stratosphere of private industry and entered a far more turbulent airspace, Washington, D.C. The Reuters headline spread like wildfire. U.S. Congress schedules emergency hearing on racial discrimination in air travel. Julian Hayes summoned to testify systemic bias in the skies. Inside the cabin, Julian remained composed, but the implications were vast. He tapped his earpiece. Elena, walk me through what this subpoena means. Her voice came back steady. It's not an attack, it's a recognition. You're not being accused. You're being called as a witness. They want your data, your timeline, your voice. Julian nodded. They'll get all of it. Passengers watched as he drafted a statement in real time on his tablet. Short, precise, no fluff, just facts. I, Dr. Julian Hayes, will appear before Congress to detail Zenith Aviation's findings regarding discriminatory profiling across the commercial airline industry. Transparency is no longer optional. He hit send. The tweet reached 1.6 million views in 8 minutes. Then came a buzz on Elena's line. Julian, she said with a mix of surprise and concern. You just got a personal message from Senator Lowell. Julian's brow furrowed. Senator William Lowell, ranking member of the Senate Commerce Committee, longtime aviation advocate, deep ties to Omni-Air. He tapped to read Julian. Perhaps it would be better for all involved if your testimony were filed privately. A closed-door session might ensure more productive results and less public spectacle. Julian stared at the message, then whispered, They're trying to keep it in the dark, Elena responded. They're worried. A public testimony means the world gets to see how deep this goes and who enabled it. Julian opened a reply box. Senator, with all due respect, I won't be testifying in the dark. We didn't bring sunlight into this cabin just to cover it with curtains in Congress. Send. Then an alert. Liam Chen, now seated in the aisle, looked up from his phone. Julian, you need to see this. On screen was a 32-second clip just uploaded to zenithjustice.org by a passenger in 3A. In it, while Julian was confronting Sarah Mitchell mid-flight, someone off camera could be heard whispering, "Get him off, quietly." Last thing we need is another diversity disaster. The voice was familiar, male, deep, clipped with political polish. Annika pulled up the audio waveform, ran it through voice match protocols, then gasped, "Julian, that's Senator Lowell." Julian didn't blink. Liam's eyes widened. He was on this flight. Julian replayed the memory. There had been a passenger who boarded with dark glasses, seated in 1D, who never looked up from his Wall Street Journal. Security clearance had placed him under a false name, Mr. L. Westfield. Julian exhaled sharply. He didn't just know, he was watching it unfold. Liam had already posted the clip. Caption exposed: Senator Lowell caught on Zen 604, urging discreet removal of black CEO. Same senator, now requesting closed-door hearing. Conflict of altitude. The clip gained 1.2 million views in under 5 minutes. Congressional staffers began reaching out for comment. Lowell's office issued a bland denial. The senator was on board Zen 604 in a personal capacity and was not aware of the details of the incident at the time. But the timestamp proved otherwise. He'd been seated in first class, within 10 feet. He had watched everything. Passengers began murmuring. "Is this how it works?" one woman asked. "They sit next to injustice and sip champagne." Julian turned to face the cabin once again. No more silence. Not on this plane. Not in Congress. Not ever again. The intercom beeped this time from the Zenith HQ Flight Operations Desk. "Dr. Hayes, we've just received formal confirmation from the House Committee on Aviation Oversight. You'll speak at 9:00 a.m. this Thursday." Live. He nodded. Then, in a decision that stunned even his legal team, Julian stood in the center aisle and looked at Liam. "Let's live stream my prep." "Your prep?" Liam blinked. "Yes. From now until the hearing. Every briefing, every document, every witness call. Let the world see the cost of truth, not just the headline." Liam's fingers flew. Breaking Julian Hayes to live stream congressional hearing prep. 72 hours of full transparency. Hayes hearing. In Omniair's executive suite, someone threw a paperweight across the room. Because now it wasn't just one man speaking up. It was a movement with a microphone. And its first words were, "We see you." The live stream feed went live at exactly 7:00 a.m. Eastern. No opening music. No title card. Just Julian Hayes, seated at a simple desk inside the Zenith Aviation Command Room, dressed in a plain black sweater. Behind him, a digital screen scrolled live updates. FAA inquiry ongoing congressional hearing. T-minus 26 hours. Total records released 21. 304. Total crew whistleblowers 6170. The internet had never seen anything like it. A CEO live streaming every second of his preparation to testify before Congress. Every meeting, every file, every awkward silence when he had to breathe through the weight of what had been buried for nearly a decade. Liam Chen handled the camera angles and moderated comments pouring in by the thousands. This is what real leadership looks like. He doesn't just speak truth. He opens the mic for others. Watching from Brazil, from Nigeria, from Japan. Racial bias in luxury spaces is global. Julian, we're with you. Julian, meanwhile, took none of it in with ego. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a reckoning. At 10:04 a.m., a soft knock came at the door of the control room. A woman entered. Sharp navy suit, silver-rimmed glasses, and a calm intensity in her gait. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Special Counsel, Dana Morales, FAA Ethics Division." He stood and extended his hand. "Ms. Morales, welcome. You're right on time." She nodded, taking a seat beside him. Dina placed a thick manila folder on the table. "I'm not here in an official legal capacity. This is personal. 3 years ago, my nephew, age 14, was escorted off a flight for raising his voice in coach. He was asking why his grandmother didn't get water. The crew flagged him as disruptive." Julian listened closely. They sealed the record, labeled it a disturbance, no investigation. Until now. She slid the folder toward him. Inside were sealed FAA internal memos from over 200 cases involving Black and Latino passengers mischaracterized, mislabeled, and never properly processed. Julian's hands paused. "May I? They're yours now. Use them wisely." Outside the live stream, feed erupted again. He's being handed evidence on air. This isn't a hearing anymore. It's history writing itself. Julian Hayes might be the most dangerous man in aviation because he's honest. Then the twist. An anonymous user dropped a new video into the stream's comment section. Unverified. "File name do not share internal security brief. Oaks T22. MP4. Liam hesitated. "Julian, this could be a trap or the truth." Julian nodded for him to open it. The screen went black. Then audio. "Look, just flag anyone who looks like they're going to complain. We don't need another PR mess like Deltagate." Another voice replied. "That's fine, but how do we tag them discreetly?" A chuckle. "Use VM, or if legal's watching, just say, demographic concern. They'll know what it means." The logo in the bottom corner was unmistakable Aeromax Airlines, a major international carrier with contracts in over 40 countries. The date? October 22nd, 2023. Julian leaned forward. "That's not a few bad actors. That's policy disguised as discretion." Elena patched in from Zenith HQ. "Julian, Aeromax stock just dropped 11%. Their legal team is requesting a private meeting. They're terrified this is going viral." Liam's voice cracked. It already has. In less than 6 minutes, the clip hit 4 million views. News anchors were scrambling. Lawyers were deleting LinkedIn posts. CEOs of competing airlines were issuing rushed statements of commitment to equity audits. Julian didn't gloat. He turned to camera 2. To the crew member who leaked that clip. "Thank you. You broke a silence stronger than steel." Then he added, "To the rest of you, watching now you know. This wasn't bad training. It was design." And then he did something no CEO had ever done before. He took off his earpiece, pushed aside his notes, and turned the microphone outward. Literally. Liam rotated the camera. Julian stood. To every Black, brown, Asian, native immigrant or marginalized traveler who's ever been made to feel like turbulence in someone else's sky. He stepped back from the mic. "It's yours now." The feed shifted to passenger-submitted video testimonials, one after another. A woman from Oakland crying as she recalled being denied boarding after a 14-hour shift. A professor from Nairobi called Mr. Coach by a flight attendant. A deaf teenager from Portland whose interpreter was told, "We don't have time for all that." Their voices filled the stream, and the world listened, because Julian gave them the microphone. 8:59 a.m., Rayburn House Office Building, room 2141. The chamber was packed. Cameras, microphones, rows of reporters typing furiously. C-SPAN's red light blinked. The entire nation was watching. Julian Hayes sat at the center of the oak-paneled witness table. To his right, Elena Ruiz, legal counsel. To his left, Dana Morales, FAA ethics advisor, appearing voluntarily. Behind them, a wall of monitors displayed footage from Zenith's live streams. Hearing discrimination and profiling in commercial aviation witness Dr. Julian Hayes, CEO, Zenith Technologies. The chair banged the gavel. We are now in session. Senator Viola Hartwell, chair of the committee, adjusted her glasses. Dr. Hayes, you have 10 minutes for your opening statement. Julian stood. No script, no teleprompter, just his voice. I came here not to make accusations, but to reveal what can no longer be denied. Discrimination in aviation isn't theoretical. It's operational. It's coded quiet and institutionalized. He paused. And it doesn't just deny seats, it denies humanity. Gasps. Silence. Then, one by one, Julian listed the codes. VM, Visual Mismatch DC, Demographic Concern LNC, Low Net Contribution OFN, Out of Familiar Norm. These weren't flight crew improvisations. They were patterns, approved, repeated, and hidden. He clicked a button on the table. The monitors flickered to footage from Zen 604, Sarah Mitchell's dismissive gesture, Thomas Blake's escalation, Emma Walsh's false tablet entry, Richard Holt's smirk. Then Senator Lowell's whispered line, "Get him off, quietly. Last thing we need is another diversity disaster." Gasps again. Lowell, seated in the rear, shifted uncomfortably. Julian didn't look at him. He looked at the committee. I was profiled on a plane I own, not because I made a scene, but because I didn't fit someone's idea of who belongs in first class. Then he added, and that's exactly why I'm here. Not just to speak, but to hand you what others buried. He tapped his ring. Elena handed over a sealed drive. 22,000 plus records, internal airline data, whistleblower logs, suppressed complaints, FAA misfiled cases. Senator Hartwell leaned forward. And you're submitting this? For public record? Julian nodded. For history. The room was stunned, but that wasn't the high point. That came next. From the gallery behind Julian, a quiet rustle. A woman in a Navy Zenith uniform stood slowly. She looked young, shaken. The room turned. She walked forward, hands slightly trembling. Senator Hartwell gestured. Ma'am, you're not on the list to testify. Elena rose. Chairwoman, with permission, this is Senior Flight Attendant Kamari Blake. She requested to remain anonymous until now. Julian looked at Kamari. Eyes met. She nodded once. Permission granted. Kamari stepped to the front. No speech. No folder. Just a tablet. She placed it gently in front of the panel. I'm here to return this. Hartwell raised a brow. What is it? Kamari tapped the screen. A flight manifest appeared. Flight 872. Date March 14, 2024. Incident code LNC passenger note. Too demanding. Doesn't match cabin energy, Kamari whispered. That passenger was a doctor, traveling with her son. They were removed before takeoff. I didn't flag her, but I didn't stop it either. The room went silent. Kamari's eyes welled. I was scared to speak, but after Julian, I'm more scared not to. Julian's gaze didn't move, but Elena placed a hand lightly over his. Support, not command. Kamari turned to the panel. This isn't just about first class. It's about who we trust with safety, with dignity. If we can't treat our passengers with respect, we shouldn't be flying at all. Then she stepped back. A beat. Then Senator Hartwell, visibly moved, spoke. Ms. Blake, thank you for your courage. Kamari nodded. Once then returned to the gallery, head high. Julian stood again. And that's the point. I didn't come here to fire people. I came here to change the altitude of expectation, The system doesn't need more protocols. It needs a mirror. A pause. Then he concluded, "This isn't about punishing the past. It's about preventing the future." And he sat. For 10 seconds, the room said nothing. Then applause. First scattered, then unanimous. Even behind the cameras, even in silent disbelief, people knew they had witnessed something bigger than policy. They had heard testimony that flew higher than politics. 3 hours after Julian Hayes left Capitol Hill, the retaliation began. Not from Omni-Air, not from Aeromax, but from within his own walls. At precisely 2:43 p.m., Elena Ruiz received a legal document via encrypted courier. It wasn't from the FAA or Congress. It was from Zenith's board of directors. She scanned the heading, "Proposal for Emergency Review of Executive Authority. Dr. Julian Hayes, submitted by board member Richard Barrington, Julian's former mentor. A man who had once said, 'Let them underestimate you. It's your greatest weapon.' He had just filed to temporarily suspend Julian's executive power, citing excessive transparency, causing reputational and financial risk. Disruption of key partnerships. Unilateral action without board consultation." Elena looked up at Julian across the conference table at Zenith HQ. "They're trying to remove you," she said, eyes sharp. Julian sat still. "They waited until I made it public, then pulled the compliance clause." He knew the clause. Section 9.7 of Zenith's charter, designed to prevent rogue leadership during crisis. He hadn't invoked a crisis, but he had exposed one, and that made him a threat. Annika barged into the room, holding her tablet like a smoking gun. "You need to see this." On screen was a leaked email from Richard Barrington sent 5 days earlier. "If Hayes goes rogue with the profiling report, we invoke Clause 9.7. The public isn't ready for full exposure. This is still a business, not a courtroom." The timestamp predated Julian's public release by 72 hours. Premeditated. Elena's voice dropped low. "They planned this before you even testified." Julian nodded, then smiled, faint calm. That means they were never on the fence. They were always building the net. At that moment across the building, alarms buzzed. IT systems locked. Keycard access was disabled. From floor 22 down to security, Zenith headquarters went into lockdown protocol triggered not by threat, but by executive override. "Richard just froze you out," Annika said. "He locked your access to the boardroom, to financial controls, everything." Julian stood. "Then we go analog." He reached for a dusty leather briefcase beneath the table. Inside, a paper binder labeled Project Northlight. Elena raised an eyebrow. "You kept it?" "Always," Julian replied, just in case the sky tried to close again. Project Northlight was Julian's private contingency, a master backup of every whistleblower record, every compliance memo, and every internal audit, printed, notarized, and hand-signed, stored in 3 secure vaults. Now it would become his counter-move. But before they could act, another alert. This one from Liam. His voice buzzed in through the encrypted line. "Julian, a story just dropped." He read the headline, "Breaking Zenith CEO. Accused of leaking proprietary client data sources, say privacy breach tied to recent transparency campaign." Julian's jaw didn't move, but his pulse surged. "Who published it?" "Wallington Financial Review," Liam said. "And guess who the anonymous source is?" A pause. Then Barrington. Julian didn't curse. He didn't yell. He turned to Elena. "They're not just trying to stop me. They're rewriting the narrative." Elena nodded. "It's a distraction strategy. They bury you in scandal before your policies can take root." Then came the twist. An email pinged from an unlikely source, Kamari Blake, the flight attendant who testified before Congress. She wrote, "Julian, I was contacted by someone on the board. They offered me $40,000 to say my testimony was coerced." Attached was a screenshot of the text. "You're a young woman. You don't want to be tied to a sinking CEO. We'll compensate you to clarify the story. Say you felt pressured to speak, that you exaggerated." Julian read it, then exhaled slowly. "They're not just coming for me. They're coming for everyone who stood up." He turned to Annika. "How's the Zenith equity stream?" "Still running," she said. "Viewers are climbing, especially after the attack." Julian nodded. "Good. Then we do the only thing they fear." Elena looked up. "What's that?" He closed the briefcase, clicked it shut. "We keep telling the truth." Louder. And then he did something they didn't expect. He called a press conference, not to defend himself, but to hand the microphone to Kamari, to Malik Jordan, to Liam, to Dina Morales, to every face they couldn't discredit. And when Kamari stood at the podium holding up the $40,000 offer message for the world to see, the retaliation collapsed like a paper plane in a thunderstorm. By the time Kamari Blake finished her speech, the world had stopped pretending. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply held her phone toward the cameras and said, "This is the price they offered for my silence. But some truths are too expensive to bury." The screenshot of the $40,000 offer had already gone viral. Within 20 minutes, 3 more whistleblowers came forward. One from Zenith's HR division, another from IT, and one a quiet, bespectacled man named Dean from Richard Barrington's own executive assistant team. Dean wasn't dramatic. He simply uploaded a folder. Board Recording March Internal MP3. Elena Ruiz listened to the first 20 seconds before she turned pale. "Julian, you need to hear this." She hit play. A smooth male voice, unmistakably. "Barrington's haze has gone rogue. This whole transparency stunt will tank our valuation. We're not built to carry justice, we're built to carry capital. If we time it right, the board can suspend him. Suppress the footage and offload Zenith to Omni-Air at 40% premium." Silence. Then another voice board member, Susan Wells, and the passenger's collateral Barrington replied flatly, "This isn't about ethics. It's an exit strategy." Julian didn't blink. He didn't need to. The fire in his eyes said everything. Liam was already posting leaked audio Zenith board, planned to sell company after removing haze. Passenger equity was never the goal, only profit. Zenith collapse. The response was swift and catastrophic. Within 1 hour, 4 board members resigned. 2 deleted their social accounts. A class action lawsuit was filed by former passengers. Omni-Air issued a statement denying involvement. FAA issued a subpoena for Zenith's entire board activity log for the last 18 months. The stock expected to dip after Richard's planted scandal instead surged 12%, buoyed by public support for Julian and the whistleblowers. Inside the Zenith HQ boardroom, panic had become the wallpaper. Richard Barrington tried to call an emergency vote to reinstate control, but only 2 directors showed up. The rest on legal hold. Julian stood in the glass atrium above them, watching as the empire built on silence began to fracture. Elena's voice was low but resolute. They didn't just lose. They detonated their own credibility. Julian exhaled. They were willing to sell out everyone, to protect themselves from truth. Annika joined them, tablet in hand. Julian media outlets are begging for comment. Forbes, CNN, BBC. Julian turned to her. "Tell them I'll speak, but not in a studio." Then, where he glanced outside at the Zenith hangar, a Gulfstream G700 was being prepared for an equity tour across the U.S. there. On the tarmac, "Let the world see the jet they tried to erase me from." Annika smiled. "Broadcast it live, every second." Meanwhile, Barrington made one last desperate move. He summoned the internal legal advisor, hoping for a lifeline. But the advisor's message was short and final. Your recorded intent to suppress civil rights evidence voids your indemnity. You're exposed. Richard sat back. His voice, once slick and sharp, was now quiet. How did we lose this? Dean, still seated nearby, finally answered. You didn't lose. You just got caught trying to bury the wrong man. At 4:30 p.m., Julian stood once again in front of the world, this time flanked by whistleblowers, by passengers, by crew, and by one surprising face, Walter Greaves, the former compliance officer from Aero 1, who had first documented the term visual mismatch. He stood silently, but his presence said everything. Julian spoke clearly, without anger. The people who tried to remove me forgot something important. This company doesn't run on silence. It runs on trust. And trust doesn't come from profit margins. It comes from accountability. He raised a single hand. This is no longer about one flight. It's about rewriting the flight plan of an entire industry. The crowd of reporters listened quiet, focused, unblinking. Then came the final blow. Elena stepped forward with a final document, a formal petition to restructure Zenith's board, backed by over 1.2 million signatures. She held it high. As of today, we're not just firing executives, we're retiring every shadow. 3 days after the collapse, Zenith Technologies entered a phase no executive manual could teach. Reconstruction. The scandal had burned everything false to the ground. Now, what rose had to be deliberate and unbreakable. Julian Hayes stood at the central command floor of Zenith HQ, this time not as a lone voice. Beside him were survivors of the storm. Elena Ruiz, now promoted to Chief Ethics Officer. Annika Sharma, officially named President of Aviation Reform and Oversight. Kamari Blake offered the new role of Director of Passenger Experience. Malik Jordan, tech founder and advocate, joining as Equity Strategy Advisor. And Liam Chen, not an employee, but now Zenith's Public Integrity Correspondent. On the main screen behind them scrolled 3 words: Trust, Fleet, Future. Julian turned to his team. This isn't about revenge, he said. This is about responsibility. We don't just rebuild our company. We rebuild what the sky means to everyone who enters it. His first move, the Zenith Passenger Bill of Rights, a 12-point document guaranteeing transparency, dignity, and accountability from crew to client, signed into operational law across all aircraft. Every point was printed inside the leather folios placed on first-class seats. Every passenger from front to back would now receive the same document. Liam posted a photo of it, captioned, "Hayes didn't just win. He rewrote the contract between company and traveler." Public response was overwhelming. 73,000 emails of support. 9,000 resumes submitted from flight crews across the country, many from airlines with histories of misconduct. One of them read, "Dear Dr. Hayes, I was a flight attendant with Omni Air for 14 years. I watched passengers cry in silence more times than I can count. I left because I couldn't protect them. If you're building something better, I want in." But the most surprising application came with no cover letter, just a name: Emma Walsh, the former flight attendant who once flagged Julian as unauthorized. Elena spotted the email first. "You want me to delete it?" Julian paused. No. He opened the file. Inside a simple one-line message. "I failed you. I failed myself. But if redemption is possible here, I'll do the work." Annika was stunned. "She tried to erase you." Julian nodded. "And now she's asking to repair what she broke." Elena crossed her arms. "And you'd trust her again? I wouldn't trust her yet," Julian said. "But I'd offer her a path. That's the difference between justice and vengeance." He replied with an invitation. You're not rehired, but if you're serious, you'll join the first cohort of Zenith's Reform Fellowship. You'll learn from the pain you helped cause, and if you finish it, we talk again. The program was announced that night, the Zenith Reform Fellowship, a 90-day immersive training for former crew staff and executives implicated in discriminatory practices focused not on punishment, but on re-education, restoration, and renewal. Over 300 applicants signed up within 48 hours. And that was just the beginning. Julian's next move was unprecedented. He opened Zenith's hiring pipeline to formerly excluded voices, formerly incarcerated individuals with aviation certifications, disabled veterans, single parents who had left the industry due to systemic bias. Kamari helped draft the initiative. She named it the Runway Program. Liam documented its launch, a single sentence pinned to the live stream. The runway isn't just for planes, it's for people ready to take off again. As momentum grew, so did the pressure and the offers. Multiple airline conglomerates approached Julian with partnership proposals. He declined most, but one offer stood out not because of the money, but because of who sent it. The FAA. They wanted Julian to help co-design a federal compliance interface based on True Sky Zenith's AI Integrity Monitor. Julian's answer: I'll do it on one condition. Every airline that uses it must sign the Passenger Bill of Rights. No exceptions. The FAA agreed. That night, Julian sat in his quiet office watching the city lights fade into the horizon. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to breathe. Annika entered, a glass of water in hand. You did it, she said softly. No, Julian replied. We started it. The doing begins now. And then a knock. Kamari opened the door. Standing in the hallway, unsure, was Emma Walsh. No makeup, no badge, just truth in her eyes. Julian stood, faced her. Why are you here? Emma's voice cracked. Because I want to earn back what I broke. Julian held the silence, then stepped aside. Then walk in. Your work starts today. 6 weeks later, Zenith Technologies didn't just recover it, became the global standard. No ads, no bragging, just numbers. 97% passenger satisfaction. 0 verified misconduct complaints. Bookings up 41%. Employee turnover down 62%. 12 airlines requesting partnership under Zenith's ethical charter. In boardrooms across America, executives began whispering a phrase once considered ridiculous. What if we did it the Hayes way? Julian Hayes wasn't on a victory tour. He was back at work. Every morning at 6:00 a.m. sharp, he met with the runway program participants. He didn't supervise. He sat among them, Emma Walsh included. She hadn't missed a single session. She hadn't asked for credit. She simply listened, reflected, and participated quietly, undoing years of unlearning. One morning, after a tough session on passenger trauma narratives, Emma stayed behind. I used to think I was just following protocol, was an excuse she whispered. Now I see it was a shield I hid behind. Julian didn't nod. He didn't forgive out loud. He simply said, the first sign of real change is when you stop protecting your past. That afternoon, Zenith HQ received an unusual request from Skycore Aviation, a $12 billion conglomerate, one of the largest in the world. Their CEO, Pierce Danton, requested a private meeting with Julian. Elena Ruiz was skeptical. Danton once said equity was a PR distraction. Julian replied evenly. Let's see if he still believes that. The meeting took place in a small conference room at Zenith HQ. Danton arrived alone. No lawyers. No entourage. Just a thin folder in his hand. He extended it to Julian. Full compliance records. Internal complaints. Unfiltered. Julian raised an eyebrow. You're offering transparency. I'm requesting your model, Danton said. All of it. True sky. Runway. Passenger Bill of Rights. I want to license your entire system and implement it across SkyCore's 118 aircraft. Elena was stunned. That's unheard of. Danton nodded. Because we've failed quietly for too long. And now passengers don't want apologies. They want proof. Julian remained still. And what do you want? Danton hesitated, then said atonement, and a seat at the table of the future. It could have been the climax, but the real twist came next. Danton added, There's one condition. We want Zenith to audit us publicly. No NDAs, no spin. Even Elena was speechless. You're asking to be held accountable, in front of the world. Danton nodded. We earned the scrutiny. Julian stood, then offered a hand. Then welcome to the new sky. The partnership went live that night. SkyCore to adopt Zenith's ethical aviation framework. Public audit begins next quarter. Industry First Alliance led by Julian Hayes. Liam posted, Julian isn't scaling a company. He's scaling a conscience. Inside Zenith HQ celebration was muted but meaningful. Emma handed out welcome kits to runway grads. Kamari met with incoming passengers to rework trauma-informed service scripts. Malik oversaw Zenith's first community flight offering underprivileged families their first-ever air travel experience on a G700. And Julian he called his mother. She answered on the third ring. Jules. Just wanted you to know, he said. That time I said I'd change the world from the window seat. She laughed. You're flying the plane now, son. Then she added quietly. And I'm proud. But not because of what you built. I'm proud because you never let it make you bitter. Julian didn't reply. He didn't have to. His silence was full of gratitude. The next morning, Zenith held its first crew renewal ceremony, a quarterly event where employees recommit to values, not metrics. It ended with a single question. What does dignity look like at 38,000 feet? Every hand wrote a different answer, but every answer held the same truth. Listening before assuming. Eyes that don't scan for wealth. Service without suspicion. Belonging without explanation. And that's when Julian stood. I'm not asking other airlines to become Zenith. I'm asking them to become accountable. You don't need our tools. You need our honesty. The press picked it up. Julian Hayes isn't building a monopoly. He's building a mirror. 2 months after the collapse, Zenith hosted its first Global Equity in Aviation Summit, held in the atrium of its redesigned headquarters, now filled with floor-to-ceiling windows and light. No security gates, no velvet ropes, just open space and open invitation. Executives, activists, flight attendants, pilots, journalists, passengers, all equal. Julian didn't speak first. He didn't want to. The first speaker was Kamari Blake, no longer afraid of her own voice. Then Malik Jordan, who had gone from silent observer to national speaker on aviation reform. Then came Emma Walsh. Her presence was unexpected, but powerful. I was the enemy, once she said calmly. But Julian Hayes didn't cancel me. He offered correction, and through that I found courage. Then she paused. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I ask for your participation. Help us keep this sky clean. The room erupted in applause. Outside, 100 new Zenith crew members raised their right hands, taking their oaths beside their families. Their children and former passengers now turned advocates. But then a surprise announcement. Anaka Sharma took the stage with Elena Ruiz beside her. We have one more speaker, she said, and you may not recognize his name, but you'll recognize his story. Out walked a boy, 12 years old, tightly braided hair, wearing a white shirt and navy slacks. His name, Zayden Cole. 2 years ago, Zayden and his grandmother were removed from a commercial flight after she requested a bottle of water. Crew cited security concerns. He had never spoken publicly, until now. Zayden walked to the mic, paused, then said, "They called us a problem, but Mr. Hayes said we were people." The room froze, not because of anger, but because of truth. Spoken simply, spoken clearly, spoken by a child. Zayden continued, "I didn't want to fly again, but my grandma told me not to give up. And now I want to become a pilot, because the sky belongs to us too." Tears fell across the crowd. Julian stood quietly in the back. Liam turned to him. "That's legacy," he whispered. Julian nodded once. Later that evening, Julian found himself alone in the quiet corner of the building's upper balcony, looking out over the tarmac where a G700 had just landed. Elena approached. Lawsuits are cleared. Whistleblower protections are formalized. FAA adopted the equity dashboard. "You did it." "No," Julian replied. "We undid the silence. Now we build the sound." Then came the final high point of the night. An international aviation body, ICAO, broadcast a surprise message. "In recognition of ethical transformation, transparency, and systemic reform, we name Zenith Technologies a global standard for equity in air travel." They renamed a new policy after Julian the Hayes provision mandatory public audit channels for passenger profiling complaints in 27 countries. Julian didn't smile big. He just whispered, "Now it flies without me." He turned to Elena. "When I'm gone, promise me you won't let this become ceremony." Elena met his gaze. "Then don't go." Julian shook his head. "I won't vanish, but it's time others fly the plane." The final shot of the evening came from Liam's feed. A still photo of Zayden standing next to Julian, both looking up at the stars. Caption, "A boy who lost his wings, a man who gave them back." This isn't about altitude, it's about humanity. The sun was setting over Terminal 5 when Julian Hayes walked alone across the Zenith runway. He didn't wear a suit, no entourage, no media waiting. Just him, a soft wind, and the echo of what he'd built echoing in the distant hum of engines flying safer, flying fairer, because he dared to say no when silence was easier. Behind him, the headquarters lights glowed warm inside the new class of Zenith Academy trainees reviewed their lesson, De-escalation through dignity. Kamari Blake had just finished teaching it. Beside them, a new wing was being constructed, the Julian Hayes Institute for Aviation Ethics. But Julian wasn't going to teach there. He was stepping away, not in failure, not in fatigue, but in fulfillment. His job was never to hold the controls forever. It was to show the world how not to crash. In his final act as CEO, he signed the Skyframe Accord, a binding multi-airline agreement to uphold ethical treatment regardless of class, color, gender, or name. 14 airlines signed. But what happened next was the final surprise. A woman stood near the end of the runway. Late 60s, sharp eyes, quiet energy. Julian recognized her instantly. Dr. Evelyn Sloan. The first black female pilot for Horizon Air retired, silenced for years after raising flags on discriminatory procedures, pushed into quiet consulting work. She walked up and extended a folder. "I've been watching," she said softly, "and I have something for you." Julian opened it. Inside blueprints, aircraft safety protocols, cabin redesigns based on emotional psychology, a full flight crew decision-making model centered on empathy over authority. Julian looked up. "I wrote these 20 years ago," she said. "They were ignored. Now I think, maybe you can finish what I started." He smiled, not with pride, but with understanding. "Let's finish it together." Dr. Sloan nodded, And just like that, a new chapter began. Not with Julian alone, but with those who once had no seat at the table, now designing the table. Later that evening, Zenith held a final celebration, not for Julian, but for every silent victory that made flight feel human again. Emma Walsh gave her last public remarks before transitioning into her new role, quietly respectfully. Liam Chen announced his new independent journalism fund, Altitude Truth, aimed at protecting whistleblowers across all industries. Kamari and Malik co-founded Open Skies, a non-profit giving free travel education and resources to students of color, and Zayden Cole. He was gifted a Zenith scholarship to attend aviation prep school, his dream no longer out of reach. Then came the final speech. Julian didn't stand on stage. He sat in seat 2A, the one where it all started. The lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated him gently. He leaned forward and spoke into a single microphone. No flight is perfect, but we measure its worth not by how smooth it is, but by what it carries, and who gets to arrive. He looked across the room. At 38,000 feet power doesn't shout. It whispers through decisions, through restraint, through recognizing that dignity is a pre-boarding right, not a first-class privilege. A pause. Then, if I leave you with anything, let it be this. Justice isn't loud, but it always lands. He stood up, walked quietly down the aisle. One by one, the room followed, not with applause, but with resolve. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this about courage, change, and justice that doesn't wear a cape, but shows up exactly where it's needed most. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.